I think we'll make a start. Welcome everybody, very, very warm welcome to this webinar on the subject of listening to nature in languages which are not our own. And this is part of Plant Life's Spring into Action webinar series. And we're really, really pleased to have a partnership with LivingLanguageLand, who are going to be talking to us about their work. As you probably know, if you're joining us from the UK, we're in the middle of a very big storm. So there may be some, and we hope not, some interruptions as we go along, but we have all kinds of plans B, and we will carry on. So a very, very warm welcome to everybody. This is an important subject for plant life. The languages we speak shape how we understand the natural world around us. And they're ways that we transmit knowledge about the land and about nature. And just as fast as we're losing species, we're also losing languages. So we're very pleased to be hosting this webinar on this subject. My name is Karen Inwood and I lead Plant Life's international work. We have some fantastic speakers in a very varied programme of videos and explanations from people from a number of countries. First of all, we have our speakers from LivingLanguageLand, Philippa Bayley, who is a scientist, a research manager, and a public engagement specialist. She's co-creative producer of the LivingLanguageLand project. And Neville Gabie, who is also co-producer of that project. And Neville is an artist. And he responds to specific landscapes and communities of people and explores the relationship between people and place. So a very big welcome to Philippa and Neville. We also have some of their partners in their project. We have presentations from Tammy Stenner from Parque de la Papa and the Asociación Andes in Peru, who are working on issues of biodiversity conservation, indigenous rights and sustainable development. So very big welcome to Tammy. And Alison Guzman and Ignacio Krell of the Maple Micro Development, which works with Mapuche communities in the southern region of Chile around Lake Bude. Alison and Ignacio will be sharing some of the work of the Bude Anumka Association. So the LivingLanguageLand project is offering a platform to minority and endangered languages. And I really encourage you to visit their website, which we'll be putting in the chat if you haven't already, where you can see that the project, Philippa and Neville, took 26 indigenous words. Those words can be heard and the stories behind those words can be seen on their website. It's absolutely fascinating. They took that to COP26, the climate conference in Glasgow last year, and they're here to tell us more about that and their partners sharing their particular contributions to that project and also a bit about their own work. So with that, I'd like to pass over to Philippa and Neville. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you all for joining us today on such an extraordinary weather affected day in the UK. I think the weather's really come home to roost, so in a way it's a really appropriate day to be having these conversations. LivingLanguageLand is a journey through minority and endangered languages, really, that reveal different ways of thinking about nature and relating to nature. And I think the project was originally funded through the British Council, and as Karen's already said, in the lead up to the COP26 summit, we shared 26 words, really to give a global audience fresh inspiration of thinking about our landscape and the environmental crisis. And I think the contributions we had were wonderfully inspirational. And I think you're going to meet two of our partners today. And again, their stories are powerfully enriching and positive stories about how we can begin to think about our landscape and environment. Our hope was always that each word would take our audience on a journey of reflection, of listening to other voices and other perspectives, and of rethinking our own relationship to the natural world outside our front doors. I think that ability to listen and to think outside of our own comfort zone is really what is central to the project for me. And the project, I think, really gives an opportunity to do that. So just a few words on what brought Philippa and I together. Philippa and I met about 10 years ago when Philippa was working at the Cabot Institute. She was managing the project there. And I just returned from Antarctica and was invited to be artist in residence at the Cabot Institute. Philippa's background is really rooted in a natural scientist. And I know for Philippa, Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, was a huge inspiration when we began talking about the project. And I'm sure Philippa will say more about that. I guess my interest in the relationship between language, the environment, and cultural communities living in different environments was really rooted in two particular projects. I spent some time in Western Australia working with a Noongar speaker, and she was the last speaker in her own community of the language. And I think she talked to me passionately about how that language of hers really gave her a sense of understanding of her environment, a particularly harsh environment, and that as a language was being lost, those connections between that environment and how to live and sustain a community in that environment were also being damaged. And she was really dedicated to trying to introduce the language back into youngsters in schools. And then more recently, I spent some time in Mashpee in Massachusetts with the Wampanoag community. And the Wampanoag's language was really destroyed through colonialism and was a lost language up until about 30 years ago, when it's gradually being brought back into use and is now taught in 11 primary schools, and it's become really central to kind of reinvigorating that community and giving them a sense of a relationship to the land. And Jessie Little-Dobart, who really led on that, she uses a phrase which I think really sums it up. She says, in our language, they left everything for us. In other words, all the clues on how we live in relation to our environment and the landscape are there in the words of their language. I think, before I pass on to Philippa, I think this project would never have happened without the fantastic commitment and contributions of everyone who shared on the project. So I'd like to extend a huge thank you to all of those people. Of course, we need to thank British Council for funding our project, and we really want to thank Plant Life for giving us this wonderful platform to share our work and to share the voices of others this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Neville. And I'm just going to pick up that thread that Neville started to share about the links between language and land, which might not seem sort of immediately obvious, but in the sense that language emerges from a place, and therefore the specifics of that place are reflected deeply in the language. And that doesn't just mean, the plants and the animals and the weather and the geography, but also the relationships to all of those other beings, and the relationships between them are all reflected in the language. So, for example, one of our contributors, a Lakota man from the United States, he shared that the Lakota language doesn't have any nouns in it. Old Lakota is a language of verbs, because everything is seen as being in motion and with an energy of its own. Everything is flowing along side by side as an energy, not as a thing. And you can see just in that example how that completely changes, or how that reveals a worldview through that language that is not just about the words and what different words are for different things. So it seems it's then a source of such heartbreak, really, that we are so focused on the use of English, really, as the language and the ways of thinking to address our environmental crisis. And we see just the incredible dominance of English in climate policy and in public engagement around climate change. And you know, at the same time, the world has 7,000 languages, many of which, as Karen said at the beginning, face extinction because they're supported by such small communities who are themselves often at the very sharp end of environmental destruction and the climate crisis. So we're trying to weave this link between language as an incredible way of understanding different worldviews, diverse worldviews from around the planet, and also raising the profile of those languages and those communities who are themselves at the sharp end of climate change. And so we really began this project with two distinct questions. One is what is being lost as these languages disappear, but also what might we as predominantly English speakers from, you know, inhabiting this sort of modern world paradigm, what might we be able to understand, and how might that change the lexicon, the way that we use words and ideas in talking about the environmental crisis. So on that first question of what is being lost, I think it's, you know, as I've said, not only are many minority language communities who may also be indigenous communities guardians of much of the world's biodiversity, but many medicinal plants, for example, are only known in their indigenous languages, which means that as the language potentially falls into disuse or you know, it becomes extinct, then so does that knowledge about those plants and animals, and potentially a very powerful knowledge. And when we reflect on what we might learn, exactly as I just shared before about the Lakota speaker and this idea that the world could appear in verbs rather than in nouns, that to me is a pretty mind-bending idea. And through the words that were shared with us by communities around the world, we found incredible power and a rich thinking for us to reframe our ideas about how we approach the environmental crisis. And we'll try and bring some of those ideas together at the end of our presentation. I'll pass back to Neville.
Well, I think for those people of you joining us today who are unfamiliar with Living Language Land, we've put together a short film. It's certainly not all the contributions. Please do look at the websites, but it gives you some sense of what the project is. So I think what we're asking you to do is just for the next 7 minutes, just suspend your thoughts and immerse yourself in some of these ideas and contributions.
Las piedras son la palabra y memoria latente de nuestros territorios y de nuestros antiguos. Son la muestra de que por estas montañas caminaron. Son abuelas sabedoras de una palabra antigua y profunda. Palabra de consejo que solo puede ser escuchada a través de la paciencia, el profundo silencio y el despertar de nuestros otros sentidos.
My people had a word, no, more than a word. Khao flowed through us, lived in us, connected us. Then it left us. When it went away, this word that is more than a word, it tumbled down the mountains and out of our mouths, a precious possession, stolen, gone. Nothing has come to fill the vacant house of the cow.
Nuestra palabra es la maloca y para nosotros es jojo anánico. Si no hay maloca, no hay nada. Los árboles por allá, partidos, el bosque partido, los ríos secándose. La protección sale también de aquí para el bosque, o sea, el territorio donde nosotros vivimos. De aquí se administra, digamos, se administra, se organiza en esos territorios que nosotros estamos. Por ejemplo, en el territorio que hay ríos, lagunas, bosque, los salados, sitios sagrados.
Thank you, Erin. That's perfect. Wonderful. So hopefully seeing the film there gave you a little sense of what the project tried to do. And we're really honored that today we're actually joined by two of the contributors to the project. So Tammy Stenner from the Parque de la Papa in Peru, in the Andes, and Alison Guzman and Ignacio Krell, who work with the community around Lake Budi Anumca, in Chile, in southern Chile. So each are going to tell you a little bit about the word that the communities that they work with contributed to the project. You might have seen Chalai was part of the film there, which comes from the Parque de la Papa and contributed by those communities. And they're going to share more about the biological and cultural heritage of the communities in which they work. So I'll hand over to Tammy.
Philippa. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Well, I'm very happy to be here with all of you from Plant Life, and had the opportunity to work with the Living Language Land project. I'm here representing several organizations. I work with Asociación Andes in Peru. This organization has worked for about 25 years in the Andean region of Peru, but has reached really globally, especially with its work in policy, international policy. So in things like climate change or biodiversity, things like that, rights of indigenous people. Andes is also implementing something called the Yachay Cuichi Pluriversity, and that's something I'm very involved in. And it's really building on Andes' experience in educational programs, particularly knowledge exchange with scientists and indigenous people, or indigenous people from different parts of the world. So we're currently implementing a learning center in the Sacred Valley of the Incas, just outside Cusco. And Andes has, over the years, worked with many different indigenous communities. In the Andes, the Potato Park, or Parque de la Papa, is a very well-known example of this work. And the Parque de la Papa is a biocultural heritage territory. So there are 6 communities which collectively manage their land, territory, resources for sustainable livelihoods, for conservation, and to affect policy as well. And this model has become very well known globally, and we have a lot of requests to try to replicate that model. One of the places where it's been replicated is in the Parque Chalacui, or Barter Market Park, where there's a great diversity of maize, also potatoes and other crops. Also very interesting and active barter markets, which move food from different altitudinal zones, contributes greatly to food sovereignty. So that's one of the places. This model is also being replicated in Tajikistan and Ethiopia. We're currently in talks with people in Philippines to do learning exchange as well. So, useful learning from the Potato Park. But today, some of the focus is on the Parque Chalacui as well. We're really happy with the new, Parque Chalacui just has a new logo this year. So a quick funny story aside, the basket in the Parque Chalacui image shows corn, potatoes, pineapple, avocado, a few things, but the original design, so this was community working with an American designer, and she drew corn and a really big potato with a couple of eyes, I guess an American view of a potato. And funnily, when the community saw that first version, they were sure she had put a guinea pig, which is another very special food, but they saw that big potato as a guinea pig and they thought, well, that's okay, but it doesn't really represent the park. So she had to change her understanding what a potato looked like and add some other crops. So that was a funny cross-cultural misunderstanding. But yeah, so we at Andes, we've helped establish these parks and also provide lots of training and technical support, look for funding, all those kind of things. And as Philippa pointed out, English you know, as a dominant global language really is the language you need to find funding. So I'm very aware of my privilege of being born an English speaker. Most of my colleagues speak Quechua and maybe Spanish, maybe not. So the English is very important for finding resources, for reporting back to donors and all those kind of things. So I am aware, you know, that English plays a role here, whether we like it to or not. And I try to use my voice to amplify voices of Indigenous speakers and provide the support they might need. So that's sort of the several organizations I'm looking at. And you already saw Chalai in the short film. And Chalai is really exchange as in bartering. And it's a very sort of central value to Andean philosophy, cosmovision, social relations. And I want to just play a few seconds of a video here. And what you will look, it's beautiful, lots of color and action, but I really want you to just take a second to listen to this section of the video, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on here. Hope you can hear this okay. Okay. Now, if anyone has any comment about what they just heard, I'd love to hear. What did you hear in there? But what I hear, first of all, I love the laughter in there, but also I like that there are so many different conversations going on. It's not just people, you know, give me some potatoes, you know, it's a whole lot of things going on. And they share about not just the thing they're trading and deciding how much to give in exchange, but they're checking in on their families. They're talking about seeds, about growing conditions, about climate. So they're sharing a lot of things in this process. And another highlight I wanted to make here is that this kind of market has a lot of different values. If we think of a typical kind of capitalist market, the main purpose is to get the most you can, maximize profit if you're selling, and maximize, you know, the benefit if you're trying to buy something. But here, of course, the social relationship is really important. And often people will give more. So it goes against that kind of maximizing because they know someone has had a hard year. Maybe it's a widow or an orphan, or people who just having a tough time. So people will often use this as a way to show solidarity with their neighbors and friends and strengthen relationships. The film also mentioned the spiritual nature. People see seeds as sacred, they're gifts from the gods. And also really family to seeds, to plants. The one example they gave was in the film was the daughter-in-law. Seeds, when they travel to another community, they're often seen as daughter-in-laws arriving in the new community, and they have to be given the right conditions and love and acceptance to be able to thrive and contribute to their new community. And of course, if they're neglected, that won't happen. So really a real family connection with seeds, and it strengthened also the social part. And this chalai, which is barter or exchange, is really just one representation of reciprocity, which is very important in Andean cosmovision. And at our organization at Andes, we use Andean cosmovision as our guide in many ways. One is it's our vision. We are aiming for sumak kausai, or well-being, balanced, harmonious existence. We also use it in terms of what kinds of work we do and how we implement those. And using this kind of IU system to understand how the parts of the world link together is one we use a lot. This is something we've sort of the idea we've developed over years working with Indigenous communities. But this vision of the world has three separate but interconnected communities, very broadly speaking communities. One of those would be Runa Ayu, or the realm of people. But it's not just people, it's people and their homes and their domesticated plants and animals, for example, domesticated water, so like tap water. Where Salka represents things that are not domesticated. We could say wild, but they have a relationship. They might be semi-cultivated or cared for, but in that sense, it's wild plants or animals, but also water that that's not dammed or put into tubes or pipes, things like that. And finally, Auki Ayu is the sacred. And this can include things like your ancestors, also sacred mountains or sacred forests or sacred sites, seeds, things like that. And in Andean cosmovision, these three things must be in balance. So you don't just prioritize human development or just conservation. All of these things have to be considered together. And the way they link to each other is reciprocity. So there's reciprocity within the human realm. So we reciprocate with each other, but also between people and plants and animals, between nature, future generations. So there's this reciprocity. People give offerings, for example, to the mountains. So they will continue to give water. That would be one example of that kind of relationship. But you see, reciprocity is really central to this whole relationship of all the elements of the earth. And this is not just living, what we consider living things. Water and rocks and mountains and those kinds of things are definitely included as well. Very broad understanding of community balance and well-being. And I wanted to show one other, a short video here where it shows this relationship between people and plants very well. We, between the Potato Park and Andes, we were successful in getting Peru to implement a National Potato Day, which is May 30th of every year. And we celebrate in many different ways. One of the things we've done for quite a few years is poetry contests. And these are very popular, young and old participating. Last year, because of COVID, we didn't do a fully in-person festival. Rather, we had participants record videos and share them that way. So what I want to share is just a short video of one of those poems. Can I play from here, or are you going to play from your side? Thanks, Erin.
No casuti mi flor vanessa puma paco, watai mi esco, comunidad paru kuna harawita ruamos titulu mi papa aswe, papa asi, tusuris pejinara chaki taklawa, orkota patariche, okota kichari. Papa muhuchata, chaypi waschanta tariku. Papa jalme, lampata japandaykusho, lloqayman pañaman. Alpata pawarishan, papa chakunata kusirikushan. Puñunachanta yapay kuhtinku, urkuta. Shamparikushan, papa tika, papa munaitat ikarimushan, apu mistio hutillana sayarimushan. Ika vallainiyo, omer punchuchangwan, churay kuhtimpa, kita chinkaripun. Alin wata kanka nachtiko anyay.
Okay, thanks. That's one of those videos I feel like you can't watch it without going, oh, it's just so cute, so moving. The relationship with the plants and the animals. She's talking about potato agriculture and just the tools and the land. And it's just such a lovely connection. And we think it's important, as we mentioned before, to maintain the use of the language, the connection that it has to place and all those resources. If you want to see any, still there? I don't know. If you want to see more about the potato poetry contest, there's the potato poetry page has several other recordings as well from some youth and some older people as well. And Olivia Angers, who curated that poetry page, also has a more academic article on this relationship between people and potatoes, using this case of the potato park, interspecies respect. So that's one article. There's another one if you want to read more about the values of Aini and the IU system. There's an article from Welsh and Argumedo. Both of these are on Ande's webpage. We have a fairly complete section of publications. We're still working on it, but you can find a lot more of this on the Ande's webpage. And finally, I wanted to just talk a little bit about how we put this into practice, because this is not just a vision or something theoretical. It's very much we try to make it, embody these principles as well. And partly it's just by the kinds of programs we have, like knowledge exchange or programs around solidarity economy, but it's also sometimes very specific practices. The Yachai Kuchi Pluriversity, we're also collecting a lot of methods and tools, which we expect to share across generations, but also with other Indigenous communities, for example. Or with the microenterprises in the potato park, they contribute a portion of their income to a communal fund, which then benefits all the communities in the potato park, whether or not they participate directly. Something like research agreements or internships, we do quite a lot of those, and we like to start talking with students or researchers early to make sure the objectives meet the needs of the Indigenous people they're researching or working with in the research, to make sure that they're considering what they give back. Very often researchers think they'll give us their thesis and that's going to be good. But a thesis in any language is not going to be that useful in communities, even if it's in their own language, because it's academic and text. So we like to have people think about what other ways can you give back to the communities and results, but maybe not in a thesis format. And by that, we do not mean to simplify the information or, leave out important things. We just want it prepared in a different way. Maybe it's maps and charts and graphs, photos, videos, I don't know, other ways. But generally that thesis, yeah, probably I'll read it, but not a lot of other people in our office would. So we like to, early on think about planning and methods and tools and results that are going to work for both. So the student gets their thesis and communities get something else. And also just working with networks. We figured that is actually one way where every member has to give, and then they also get back. We amplify our voices, or we refine our messages. We have maybe more impact globally by working together. Anyway, just to show that you can actually put these things into practice as well. So I'm going to leave it there.
Tammy, thank you so much. That's absolutely brilliant. And yeah, wonderful to hear young woman Vanessa Pumapaco reciting her poem there, and you can see the text of what she said in the chat. I want to hand over, I realize time is running short, to Alison Guzman and Ignacio Krell from Chile, and they'll talk a little bit about their work with Budianunca. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. Thank you, everyone, for this space to share our work with Budianunca. My name is Ignacio Krell. I co-direct with my partner, Alison Guzman, the Maple Micro Development in Chile. It's a small NGO, which is allied to Budianunca, an indigenous-led organization that was formed a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, but it's also the product of a longer trajectory, an intergenerational one, aimed at the biocultural restoration and revitalization of Mapuche territory. We are talking to you from Mapuche lands. Mari Pupeñi Pulamien, Mari Compuche. We greet you from ancestral lands of Mayo Lafken, the small city of Villarrica. But our work with Budianunca is actually focused in another basin, in a coastal basin, about 100 kilometers from here. We've been collaborating with these communities, Mapuche Lafkenche communities, for about 10 years now. And I will briefly try to be very brief in introducing a little bit about the Mapuche people, in case. But first of all, I want to say that we were requested to use this space by the Budianunca leaders, since they are right now, as we speak, in a ceremony, in a cultural ceremony, that also has to do with this process of biocultural revitalization. So we are sort of covering for them, but we are very, very, very happy to share some ideas that might be of your interest. So very briefly, the Mapuche are I was going to say strongest, but it's the largest indigenous group in Chile, with about 1 million members. And their homelands are in southern Chile, or in Mapuche language, Hualmapu. And the Budi Lake is in the coastal area of this region. As I said, it's actually connected to the Pacific Ocean. It's a mega diverse coastal wetland, and it's also historically a refuge for the Mapuche people after the invasion by the Chilean state in the 19th century. And to this day, it's also a biocultural refuge for Mapuche language and ceremonies and traditional governance in a way. So this is what we are supporting basically in a process of revitalization in this particular territory. Alison.
Yeah, Mari Compuche, Alison Guzman Pingen. Very briefly, as co-director, I wanted to speak a little bit about my work with revitalizing traditional ways of interacting and relationship building with Itrofil Mongen, which is what Budianunca wanted to present today on their concept of environment, quote unquote, but it's a lot more depth and complex in the way of Mapuche perspectives. My work is linked to revitalizing ways of this reciprocal relationship with the wetlands through artisanry, arts and crafts, but also innovative ways of using technologies and archive systems with plants. So this is something that is being co-designed, and as Ignacio mentioned, is within the guidance of the traditional authorities and custodians of the wetlands. today we want to show you two brief videos, one of them of which is the greeting from Lamian Fernando Quilaqueo, who could not be with us today. As Ignacio mentioned, he's in the community with a ceremony on revitalizing medicinal relationships with the land. And I will ask Erin to please share the greeting from Fernando, please. Thank you. And finally, I don't know, Philippa or Neville, if we have enough time for the final video, which is linked to Budia Nunca's work in the territory.
Maybe Alison, can we just show a couple of minutes of it and then put the link in the chat? Because I do want to make sure that we have the chance to answer some questions.
Absolutely.
So yeah, let's show a couple of minutes of the film, Erin, if that's okay.
Como persona, habitamos un espacio determinado, con todos los elementos constitutivos y que viven allí y que viven junto a nosotros o nosotros juntos a esos otros seres, ya sean aves, sean animales, peces, mar, el lago, plantas, medicina. Entonces eso hace que nosotros tengamos el control de los espacios, de los distintos espacios o microespacios en donde se puedan generar elementos que nos permitan sostenernos y proyectarnos como pueblo.
Y los árboles cada cual tiene su propósito de medicina. Me gusta estar rodeada de plantas, de tener arbolitos. Y voy aprendiendo del arbolito porque yo voy a pescar una hojita de canela para mi dolor y se me calma.
Antiguamente este territorio estaba muy poblado, digamos, con muchos árboles nativos, ecosistema donde nosotros, los pueblos originarios, vivíamos, digamos, de este bosque. Y hoy en día estamos en una situación muy deplorable, donde tenemos problemas, digamos, de sequía por el cambio climático y también por el uso excesivo, digamos, de químicos de la agricultura convencional. Los recursos de agua como los menocos, que son elementos sagrados en la cultura mapuche, están prácticamente olvidados, están secos, digamos.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Maybe briefly mentioning that you could all hear and see the traditional chief of the community, Loco Jorge Calfuqueo. The woman there was Lamian Olga Huentemilla, one of the tree nursery coordinators, and of course Fernando that you already met, who is the technical manager of Budia Nunca, and also an agroecologist. So thank you very much, and you can see the whole video, and we have more material in the Maple Micro Development channel in YouTube, if you like. And you can also see in the project the Itrofilmongen word that Budianunca shared, right?
Yeah, all of those links are in the chat, so people can follow those and hopefully be opening windows as we speak for watching later. Thank you so much, Alison.
Thank you.
Ignacio.
And can I just say, it's a lovely film. It's really worth watching if you get a chance.
And of course, what you're seeing is that we've got way more that we would like to share with you. And thank you so much to our contributors from Chile and Peru for bringing the distinctive elements of their own contributions to this project. Neville and I have been so honored by working in this project for the last year, and we very much hope to be able to continue it through different collaborations, possibly focusing on specific regions of the world and exploring languages more in depth there. As we said, there are 7,000 languages in the world, so there's a huge incredible reservoir of knowledge and understanding. We're also working with schools and teachers to bring this project to them, particularly in the UK. And wherever you're based in the world, you're very welcome to use the words in your own practice, as long as you're happy to credit the people who contributed the words to the project. That's an important part of it, is to make sure that those linkages back to the communities that contributed the words and shared their understanding is made. I just want to finish with a little quote from another of our contributors that I feel just says so much about what this project has been about, and really about the relationships and the reciprocity that everybody here today has spoken about. And this is a quote from a woman called Marie-Emily Lacroix, who is from the Innu people of Eastern Canada. And what she says is, "We're part of an interdependent circle of life. From generation to generation, our teachings say that the earth doesn't belong to us, but rather we belong to her, bearing in her our own distinctive roots." So with that, I think we'd like to finish, and we'd really welcome your questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Philippa. Thank you, all of the contributors. Amazing, interesting, thought-provoking, and really moving, heartwarming contributions. So we really only do have time for a couple of questions. So I'm just going to select a couple, and we'll have to answer them quite quickly. So there's a question here. Do any of the speakers have any advice for people working in conservation, how they can use non-English languages to make positive change for vulnerable ecosystems and species? So there's obviously a real resonance with what you're saying, people who are working in conservation within English. Has anybody got any thoughts on that?
I could just give one quick thought on that. Besides the language, what was mentioned is there's a lot of knowledge in the language. One of the ways we can include that in conservation is just in research in general, because there has to be research about what the trends are with particular species, but also what the problems are. But you can use indigenous knowledge of understanding ecosystems or characterizing plants. They don't necessarily use the same criteria that we, scientists do. So that's one way, is just recognizing different ways of characterizing or understanding or describing things. But also, I think really important, just understanding the causes of loss. If we're looking at things like climate change, of course, indigenous communities aren't contributing a lot to that, but they are suffering the consequences. So they need support for adaptation and implementation of strategies in their own territories as well. Anyway, a couple of thoughts.
Anybody else like to contribute to the answer, or shall I move on to another question?
Sure, we have a couple of notes.
Yeah, very briefly, just again, insist in the idea of biocultural conservation and restoration as a holistic approach, where we need to take very seriously, as Tammy also said, the needs and I'm not talking about only material immediate needs, but the needs and capacities and strengths of the communities considered from their own viewpoint. And for that, we need new methods that enable full participation of these communities through their own protocols and leadership. I think that's my part also.
Yeah, and this whole concept of language allows this to revitalize itself. We're learning through this archiving system that sometimes it's difficult to understand the relationship of conservation with language, traditional language, because conservation is a new concept. But it is language that maintains this reciprocal relationship. So maybe through language, an indigenous-led approach can be further potentialized and perhaps even shared with non-indigenous communities in the near future.
So a related question then is, so where would be a good place to start? Would it be to learn another language or to study medicinal plants? Who wants to answer?
Can I answer?
Sure.
Well, we've been working with Alison and Budianunca and the team in a concept that we developed or framed as indigenous-led co-design processes. So basically what we are saying is that we need to have a non-extractive practice where we learn not from traditional knowledge, as in trying to extract it from communities, but actually what we are proposing is that we can all learn from the co-design processes themselves as they develop over time. But yeah, I don't want to overextend. I don't know.
That's, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Can I just say that from my own point of view, the thing that I've learned most through this project is actually just opening ourselves up to listening to other perspectives. And I think if if we respect the incredible knowledge that's held within indigenous communities and indigenous languages, and we open ourselves up to the possibilities of what we could learn from those, that is a huge step forward, I think.
And that's a fantastic place to finish, Neville. Thank you. I think that the words that have really come across to me are respect and reciprocity. And as that ending word is listening to nature, listening to other communities and cultures from which we have so much to learn. So as an ending, sorry we weren't able to answer everybody's questions in the time, but a huge thank you to Philippa and Neville, and to Tammy and to Alison and Ignacio, and to all of the people who contributed from various countries through the videos. Particularly thank you to Vanessa for her gorgeous poem, and from introductions from other people such as Fernando. On behalf of Plant Life, thank you very much to all of our panel of speakers. It's been absolutely fascinating. There's a huge amount to follow up in terms of videos and links and websites that we've put in the chat. We really encourage you to do that. As well, this is not the last of Plant Life's Spring into Action webinar series, so please go onto our website and sign up to more webinars. We look forward to continuing this discussion in the future about culture and language and conservation and how we protect species and how we protect culture and how we protect the languages that are related to land and culture and peoples. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, for being here, for staying with us through difficulties of sound and others in the middle of a huge storm as we're broadcasting it from the UK. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you.